Hello folks, welcome to the start of a new week. It is time for some Warhammer 40,000 lore, and quite a controversial one, as I will be discussing the Space Wolves today. Before we do anything else though, if you like what I do, the Patreon is down below. Just one quick announcement I wanted to say about that, is that if you are on the Patreon, or Patreon, if you're a patron on Patreon, you will receive these videos at least 24 hours early to get a good look at them beforehand and give me some feedback on things I might want to change, things like that as we go forwards. And also it allows me to talk to you one-to-one as it's on, by the way, in the comments and things like that. So if you want to do that, head over to the Patreon. If not, please subscribe to the channel, and if you do subscribe, hit the notification bell. It's the only way you are going to see any of my videos, because YouTube will not show you any of anyone's videos unless you hit that notification bell. So, thank you very much for that. Let's get into some Space Wolf lore, because there is a lot to go through here. I'm going to title this video Space Wolves, Why the Hate, or something of that ilk. So here we go. The faction I love to hate on, and the one that people like to bring up with me a lot, just to see what kind of rage they can induce. Contrary to popular belief though, I don't hate the Space Wolves at their core. I hate what they represent, and certain parts of their fanbase. If you thought the Dark Angels were suffering from being typecast and boiled down to their more meme parts, then we are about to cover one of the two chapters in 40k that I believe suffer from this phenomenon the most, the other being the poor Blood Angels. So sit back and grab a beverage as I discuss the Space Wolves and how they've been done extremely dirty in my opinion. First I'm going to start with the good, and the good is shorter than the bad because this will be quite a ranty video. There is a lot to like about the Space Wolves, from being a boiled down lore perspective, so just going to the lore and boiling it down to its component parts. Unlike what Games Workshop likes to do when they like to give you the lore and give you all the meme parts of the lore, focus on those and be lazy and not focus on anything else. Well, if you actually dig into what the Space Wolves are, they are actually quite an interesting chapter in Legion. They come from a savage world that is supposed to resemble a snowy wasteland, and, for all intents and purposes, are leaning into some Norse mythology that a lot of people find very interesting. I know that's kind of overdone these days, and I do think that quite a lot of the hatred that comes towards the Space Wolves is because people are generally sick of Norse mythology. I do think that has come about in the past 10 to 15 years in modern culture, where we've seen shows like Vikings, and we've seen shows like The Last Kingdom, and all these other things that are aping on Norse stuff, and to me, Vikings in general are very eye-rolly, let's be honest. Even when I'm watching things like Vikings, sometimes when I'm watching it, I just roll my eyes thinking, oh my god, you're so macho. Oh my god, you're so amazing and macho, brilliant. And especially when we get things like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, that treat the Vikings as the good guys when they're raiding and pillaging most of Britain for no reason than they want plunder and they want to wreck things. But yet they're the good guys. You know, it hits a sort of tonal whiplash that people don't seem to respond well to, including myself. And that's kind of why the Space Wolves get at least about 20% of their hatred as far as I'm concerned. Their curse is also rather indicative of who they are and how they are treated by Games Workshop, with their bloodline normally used in a similar way to that of the Black Dragons, in that they have elongated canines and shaggy thick hair covering most of their bodies. Their Primarch, similarly, Lemon Russ, or Lehman Russ, I call him Lemon because it annoys people, takes the form of some sort of barbarian king, and is the only Primarch to beat the Emperor in a competition when it comes to when he meets him for the first time, fair and square. Sigh, when he out-eats the Emperor of Mankind in an eating competition. Most of the happy and Father Christmas style hobbyists I've come across are Space Wolf players. Jovial and larger-than-life dudes. Generally, these blokes are awesome, and I bet you've seen them at your local store having a laugh and being dads of the hobby in general. There are generally two types of Space Wolf player, and I know a lot of them form into this first mould of the jovial, happy guys, right? The guys who are the dads. A lot of them form into that area of the hobby. The second type, we will discuss later, unfortunately. Two of my best friends at school were Space Wolf players and started out in this way, happy and jovial. I have no idea what they are like these days as times have pulled us apart, but safe to say, I had a big exposure to the good side of the Space Wolf player base in my youth, which is why the latter half of this video kind of sucks to write, to be honest. Their way of war is perfectly encapsulated in their pre-heresy conflicts with the World Eaters, where it is revealed that actually the Space Wolves and the World Eaters are practically the same army in terms of tactics and rage. The Space Wolves, however, are tempered by marine discipline, where the World Eaters, quite simply, are not. As such, Angron is isolated, even as he beats Leman Russ near to death and defeats him, attacked by the entire Space Wolves force and then forced to stand down lest he be destroyed. This is probably my favourite story regarding the Space Wolves, as it shows something within Leman Russ that we do not get to see very often. A mind capable of self-sacrifice for the greater goal and of teaching some pretty valuable lessons to somebody like Angron. In fact, I see this as being a moment where the ball is dropped on Angron and not Russ. Angron should be forced into some sort of doubt, at least temporarily, about his place in the galaxy. He is being confronted by a more noble and sane version of himself. It's a shame that this is never seen again in the setting for the most part from either Primarch. So this is a really good story for both Primarchs that isn't really picked up and ran with by Games Workshop, unfortunately. But it's one of the main moments that I look at Leman. I'm going to call him Leman for this part because I like him. It's one of the main parts that I see of Leman Russ where I think, do you know what? This guy's actually pretty badass. Like, he sacrifices his own body to teach a lesson to Angron. Say, look, you know, your warriors are not disciplined. They have the same rage as mine, but not the discipline. Mine are able to stand by whilst I'm getting beaten by you, because they know there is a wider objective to hit here that we're not going to hit if they run to my aid, sort of a thing, right? The strength of the Space Wolves lies in their ability to inspire with their imagery and ways of war. Essentially, everything around the periphery of what the Space Wolves are is fantastic when you think about what kind of warriors they are. Savages reined in by honour and a dedication to the Imperium that Russ helped build. That should be at the core of what a Space Wolf is, and should be around which everything else is moulded. It is a shame that Games Workshop, as we will see, have wandered so far off course. And there goes the positivity in our Space Wolves video. I know, it was fleeting, but I had to say something, because I really do like the Space Wolves at their core. I just don't like what Games Workshop has done with them. Those are two completely different things, you know what I mean? Like knowing what the Space Wolves are, and liking what they are at the core, and what the Games Workshop chooses to do with them are two completely different things. And so we get into the bad of Space Wolves. You know that part of the video, normally, where I talk about, if you like X, then this is definitely the army for you, in the good section? Well, Space Wolves are the only faction where I think I will actually be doing that in the bad section. Want lazy stereotype space Vikings in power armor? This faction is for you. Harsh, right? Well, not really. The model line for Space Wolves is atrocious for the most part in my opinion, and actively rips away from any form of realism in the Warhammer 40,000 hobby. As much as Logan Grimnar's Santa Slay is funny, every time I see it on the tabletop, I do a little cringe and hope no women walk in to see this toy thing on the tabletop. And that's just one part of the Space Wolves model line. Thunderwolf Cavalry, anyone? They should look awesome, shouldn't they? Instead, they look like Thunderwolf Cavalry. Don't even get me started on the bloody Wolfen. Focusing on that for a second, the Wolfen are a haphazard and lazy cash-in on what the Space Wolves are supposed to be. Instead of being tragic warriors barely containing this rage inside, they are instead werewolves in space. That's it. Just werewolves in space. That is the limit to which Games Workshop engage their brains when writing the Space Wolves main flaw. That is it. They're literally werewolves in space. Just like the Space Wolves are Vikings in space. I think this is why other chapters despise them so much. They tend to get away with things other chapters would not, and get gifted things other chapters do not. Every single chapter has a serious drawback, right? Has a serious thing that they have that is holding them back from being amazing. Even the Ultramarines have certain drawbacks. They are tactically inflexible, to say the least. And It is something that we'll cover in the Ultramarines later on, but they are the only other chapter, the Ultramarines, that have anything close to the Space Wolf protection when it comes to bad things happening to them. The Space Wolves in general, let's be honest, every single time they take a loss, and I'll get into that later, but every single time you look at their main flaw, which is their genetic heritage, which causes the Wolfen, it is treated as something that is really cool, and just makes them more powerful. That should never be the case. Why did the Blood Angels have to put up with something so debilitating? You know, why do the Dark Angels need to put up with being called Chaos all the time because of their own flaw and being really secretive, right? Space Wolves don't. They just become werewolves. Which is cool. Like, how is that a flaw? It's not a flaw. I've gone over this before. Anyway, in essence, many of the folks who like them are the man-children who cannot take losing. They need all of the cool and none of the bad. If something terrible and non-metal/awesome happened to the Space Wolves, there would be an absolute outcry from much of their fan base. Now, please, I know, the fury of Magnus happened, but still, they beat off Magnus. Demon Magnus. Nevertheless, do you know what I mean? They took an L, maybe, but they still beat the shit out of Magnus. Again! Like how embarrassing! How embarrassing! This guy is now a demon, and he can't beat a single chapter of Astartes? Are you shitting me? Anyway, moving on. Space Wolf players tend to be outspoken, loud, and in your face, and very ready to tell you how great their faction is. I have a friend, Sean, who is a Thousand Suns player who actually likes the Space Wolves. He plays them in Kill Team, but he hates Space Wolf players. Every time he has matches against them, they are leaning over the table and shaking their fists at him, shouting about how Russ beats up Magnus whenever he gets the chance. Prospero burns, all your bases belong to Russ, the whole 9 yards. I actually asked him for a quote for this video, and he sent me one that said this, quote, it's from Sean, so thank you Sean, by the way. He says, listen, the Wolf players I come across are generally good people, until they find out I am playing Thousand Suns. Then it's like I am a Celtic fan, and I've walked into a pub full of Rangers supporters. If you don't know what that means, unquote a little bit there, but if you don't know what that means, it means that Rangers and Celtic fans generally hate each other to the point where it's kind of religious and they literally try and beat each other up, sort of a thing, right? Alright, quote again. It's all overly aggressive behaviour and douche remarks about how my army is a weak faction for weak people. I'm not kidding, somebody actually said that to me. I think that's why people resent them so much. Like, the lore gives them so much, and they seem to invest their self-worth in it, and go against anybody who brings that into question pretty hard. It's gotten to the point now that when I see Wolves players at an event, I actively avoid them just in case, which is a shame because a lot of them are really decent guys. I just seem to get matched against the wannabe chads, unquote. Okay, so, and therein lies the problem. Wannabe chads. The Space Wolves are a chapter of projectors. People throwing out their masculinity out there to prove how tough they are. And I put masculinity in quotes there. Ever hear stories about that guy at the gym? You know, the one who is jacked but tells everybody else they are taking the wrong supplements and using the equipment incorrectly? The one who is generally unwelcoming and kind of condescending to new people if they don't follow his exact ways of doing things? Yeah, welcome to Clan Space Wolf. I hope you have a splendid time here. I hope this part of the video gives a few of you a come to Jesus moment and you can adjust your behaviour because your army deserves better. As I said before, most Space Wolf players are the happy-go-lucky, jovial dad type people who are into the hobby, but unfortunately there are quite a few in your subset of the fandom that act this way, that rub people up directly the wrong way, right? Let's discuss that lore for a second. Let's move away from real life stuff and get into the lore. It reads like writers are either one of two things, right? And I'll get into that right now. They're either number one, afraid to have the Space Wolves actually lose, like at all, or number two, they are afraid to have the Space Wolves resemble intelligent human beings, like at all. Let's discuss these back to front. Let's cover them back to front. Let's discuss intelligence first. The Siege of Terra, there would have been a foregone conclusion had the Space Wolves been there. There. I said it. My respect for their capabilities as a legion is that high. I rate Space Wolves in the top 5 of power. I really do. I think they're fantastic. Instead, the writers had Lehman Russ on Terra, ready to go. He's ready to go. He's ready to defend Terra. Only to then decide to try and steal all the glory for himself by actively trying to assassinate Horus on his own flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. Does this sound like something the Russ from the Angron story would do? No. Because that Russ is well written, and a show of what Russ is capable of in terms of humbling himself for the greater plan. Whilst this may be a symptom of writer whiplash, as different authors see Russ as being different things, it still shows how Russ and his legion are boiled down to their ridiculous memes for the sake of a chuckle, or more simplistic storytelling. Instead, whilst wounding Horus, because we can't let the Space Wolves actually take a clear loss, of course, a Chaos-charged Horus at that is about to kill Sanguinius in a few months, he fails and is now cut off from Terra, whilst Horus wakes up eventually from the duel and continues on his merry way. It is said something is lost of Horus in this duel, but I don't see it, and I think if Games Workshop say that this is the moment where Horus started to break and become a ranting pawn of chaos, I think this is just a tragedy that sacrifices the momentum of Horus, the main chapter of the Horus Heresy, so Russ can get yet another moment in the shine that he simply doesn't need. Why doesn't he need it? Because he killed at least 2 entire legions on his own. And that's not really an exaggeration when we look at the wider lore. It is hinted very clearly that the Space Wolves were the ones used to get rid of one of the 2 legions that went rogue. The 2nd and 11th legions that went AWOL, that generally aren't in the setting anymore. It is very highly hinted that the Space Wolves were the ones to get rid of at least one of those legions. We see them also taking down the Thousand Sons in the Heresy on their own homeworld. That's right. Where the entirety of the Thousand Sons' strength was gathered, the Wolves simply still beat them with relative ease. Yes, there are mitigating factors such as Magnus wanting the Wolves to punish him and his legion for his mistakes, but let's be honest, this is a Primarch almost bending over backwards to ensure that Russ and the Wolves get their moment in the sun, that again, they don't really need. It is an insipid defence of their homeworld that brings much of these events to pass. No legion would ever just straight up defeat another, or should ever straight up defeat another, no matter the circumstances, if it is a 1v1 fight to the death. It should just be mutually assured destruction, right? If one legion faces another in a fight to the death, they should both die. They should both be absolutely annihilated by the other. That's how it should work. Instead, we get Russ lolcowing all the way through the Thousand Sons homeworld like he is on a Sunday morning stroll. These facets of Space Wolf lore actively turn most fans against them and turn a lot of those who like them into uber defensive Chad wannabes who can never seem to take a straight loss no matter the occasion. Everybody has flaws. Every legion and every chapter has theirs, even the Ultramarines. The Space Wolves get a cool one, as I mentioned before in the Werewolves. Everyone has losses and things that go badly for them. Ultramarines that calf anyone? The Space Wolves get lost duels that they can actually claim that they kind of won. They are not allowed clean losses. They are the Star Wars Rey of Warhammer 40,000. Yes, I went there. This is why they are despised so much by most people. Let's move on a little bit, shall we? I don't want to get into it again, but the Months of Shame should not be a part of Warhammer 40,000 lore at all. The Months of Shame, for those of you who don't know and you haven't heard me rant about it before, took place after a war for Armageddon, where a lot of the people on Armageddon were exposed to demons. The Grey Knights and Inquisition wanted to either exterminate them or put them into camps where they couldn't harm anybody should they fall to chaos, whereas the Space Wolves refused this and ended up attacking the Grey Knights and the Inquisition. Yeah, and got away with it too. This isn't about power levels. Again, this isn't about the Grey Knight shouldn't be beaten by any normal Marines when they shouldn't. But This is more about what a Marine chapter is allowed to get away with. Even if they are a first founding chapter, I don't care. You don't get away with attacking the Inquisition. You just don't. You don't. Go and ask the Celestial Lions whether you get away with even going against the Inquisition. You don't. You do not. Space Wolves do, though. Because the law will break its own back. The law bends over backwards to accommodate the Space Wolves rather than the other way around. To me, I would have had the Space Wolves see the writing on the wall and simply escape with all of the people of Armageddon before the Grey Knights even realise what's happening. That they could then disavow any knowledge of them when the Inquisition ask. This would show the Space Wolves can play the game of politics and they aren't all idiots. What did we get? Space Wolves killing Grey Knights and Inquisitors. I don't care if there are mitigating circumstances in terms of power level. I don't care. This should never happen in the law without serious repercussions. It's like Ultramarines attacking the Adeptus Custodes. There would be fucking hell to pay. But of course, these are Space Wolves. Not for the Space Wolves though, oh no. They are protected by Games Workshop for fear of upsetting their ridiculously fragile, egoed fanbase. Again, as I said earlier, some of you, most of you, are fine blokes, but you are given a very bad name sometimes by people who should know better. So, enough ranting. How would I change them? I've gone on and on and on and on and on about how I don't like their law, this and that, but how would I actually change them? Let me put my money where my mouth is. Alrighty, well, since I've ripped into them somewhat, as I just said, I will put my money where my mouth is. Within the Horus Heresy, we see the Space Wolves lean into the actual cultural heritage they are drawing from, if I'm writing them. So this is me writing the Space Wolves from start to finish. Space Wolves lean into the fact that they're Space Vikings, but they do so in a way that isn't memeable. Fenris is actually a world of pirate stations and raiding parties, and this is how Russ is discovered. He leads a raiding party to the Emperor's flagship, no less, and meets him there before getting his backside handed to him by about 10 custodians. This shows the Space Wolves they act as the Vikings actually did, picking at lonely ports and even large worlds and taking what they want before disappearing and leaving once more. They become a legion of Norse assassins, yes, you heard me right, with fading through the dark as the Vikings did and appearing where they are least expected. They can take down a Primarch and even Magnus later on in this way, such as their tactics, catching him in the void and using a huge force of Silent Sisters to make him teleport away or be destroyed. I actually changed that a little bit later on, but that's one idea that you could use for them going after Magnus. I would actually have the Emperor order that the Thousand Sons be destroyed, as the flesh change is something he cannot abide. We see this later, by the way, when he talks to Magnus on Terra. When Magnus makes it to Terra, and he asks Magnus, look, you need to forsake your sons, you need to forsake the Thousand Sons, and let me destroy them, because I have a new chapter for you to lead. Because the Emperor wants Magnus to lead the Grey Knights anyway. So he doesn't want the Thousand Sons around. So he orders the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels, not the Ultramarines, the Dark Angels. Why? Because the Dark Angels are also executioners. They're also the guys with the big weapons that can annihilate an entire world that nobody really knows about. So the Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioners, and the Dark Angels, the Emperor's destroyers, they go to the Thousand Sons homeworld to take on the Thousand Sons. And the battle goes very much as we see it in Prospero Burns. But this is the place where the rivalry between Russ and the Lion is struck, right? So, instead of the Thousand Sons just getting their cheeks clapped by the Space Wolves, because the Space Wolves are so amazing and powerful, instead, it's 2 legions versus 1. In fact, it's 2 legions that specialise in going after the biggest, baddest threats in the galaxy against 1, right? And we can see why the Thousand Sons actually lose. They lose because, again, it's unfair. What they're being asked to come up against is unfair. But Russ and the Lion, they get into each other's way, and Magnus gets away, much like he does in the actual book. He is crippled and nearly dead, but he gets away. He breaks his soul into a million shards, and off he goes into the night, right? And this leads to a duel between the loyalist Primarchs of Russ and the Lion. That's right. This way we see their duel in a mainline book and not in some throwaway thing somewhere, right? We see the actual rivalry form on the Thousand Suns homeworld, rather than in some backwater planet somewhere, in a conflict that nobody cares about. The Space Wars would be written in a mixture of Conan the Barbarian and the new God of War games, the new Norse God of War games. So imagine those two mixed together. That is essentially what Fenris looks like in my new look Space Wolves, and what the Legion looks like away from the world. They become a chapter of raiding space pirates, with a failing gene seed that makes many of them turn into Wolfen and go mad, attacking even their own brothers in a way similar to the Blood Angels, but the difference is the Wolfen, unlike the Death Company, cannot be controlled. They are put down like dogs. Really, I want to get rid of the Wolfen entirely, but I want to stick to certain ideas that Games Workshop clearly wants. Imagine Wolfen on chains like dogs on all fours being prodded towards the enemy by rune priests. Badass, right? Yeah. As a chapter, the Space Wolves would actually be smaller in number than many others and be formed into things called packs. Each pack would be on a single stealth warship, travelling the void in a similar way to the Carcharodons, attacking the enemies of mankind where they expect it least. I would have all of them be like white scars in needing to have the freedom of the stars to roam in. Each pack has a different colour scheme and culture. That means we can have a myriad of different wolves for different purposes, from assassins to bodyguards, ruthless mercenaries to stand-up normal Astartes brotherhoods, from religious shaman zealots in the Allfather and Russ to warbands seeking fame and glory. All of it should melt into the wider Norse leaning of their chapter, but still have its own thing going on that is very grimdark and 40k. Russ will not just disappear like he does in the current lore, which is fucking lame. Yeah, do you know why he disappears in the current lore, by the way? Because he's not allowed to lose. He disappears because he's not allowed to fucking lose. Every other Loyalist Primarch either loses or gets hoodwinked. Even Jagatai Khan gets trapped by the Dark Eldar, right? He gets hoodwinked. Same thing happens to Gilliman. He gets beaten by Fulgrim, right, and goes away for a while. The Lion gets beaten by Luther. Don't know how the fuck that happens, but we covered that in the last session, so we won't go into that one, right? Every other Loyalist Primarch is either dead outright, rumoured to be dead outright, or is actively, like, lost somewhere, right? They're hoodwinked by the enemies somehow. Like Corvus Corax, right? Annihilates himself, goes into the Eye of Terror. But Russ just gets to disappear. Why? Because Russ can't lose. He's not allowed to lose. He's lame as fuck. Instead, in my rewrite, he actually does exactly what he does in the Horus Heresy in real life. He attacks Horus, but fails. He fails hard. He's expecting normal Horus, you see. And you know what? Normal Russ could probably beat normal Horus. And instead, he is confronted with chaos-infused Horus. I name Horus in different ways in the entire video. It really is annoying me. With chaos-infused Horus and is beaten. Most of his men are killed, and his legion is decimated by their retreat as they try to recover his body. He sacrifices most of the rest of his legion when he wakes up, simply to get back to Terra to aid in the defense, to make amends for his mistake, right? He is desperate to get back to protect his father. He's desperate to get back and protect the Emperor. Barely 10,000 wolves make planetfall that are remaining with him. One of them is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, of course. But it is enough to turn the tide of the Eternity Gate battle and give the defenders time. Time which the Emperor uses to teleport aboard the Vengeful Spirit. He gives Russ the penance task of holding Terra, whilst Sanguinius and Dawn go with the Emperor, which Russ accepts, now ready and humble enough to accept his role at the Emperor's request. He actually starts to win the war on Terra, as the Emperor and Horus cross swords in the void above. A tragic irony, meaning the Emperor's ultimate sacrifice might not have been needed if people simply believed in the tactical genius of Russ as he starts to turn the war on Terra around, right? How cool would that be? He gets back and it actually starts to defeat the remnants of the traitor legions. So if the Emperor only knew that, he could have teleported back down onto the surface and not faced Horus. But he didn't. He thought, you know, he punishes Rus by leaving him behind. It's the Emperor's last fatal mistake. And then he doesn't believe that Rus can tactically win the battle on Terra, so he leaves him there. He doesn't fully trust him anymore because he left him. He left him. He went against Malcador the Sigillite's request and went to try and take on Horus on his own. It is a tragic irony that Rus has grown as a person and he is now this amazing Primarch, but people don't believe him because of what he once was. This arrogant blowhard who got most of his legion killed. How fucking tragic is that? Right? I'm now on the side of Rus. I'm now on the side of the Space Wolves. They're badass to me in this Horus Heresy. Because we've solved the issue of them just destroying 2 Primarchs. You know, because they're so powerful and amazing. No, they had mitigating help there. They had the Dark Angels there. And even then, they kind of failed because Magnus got away. Right? Magnus got away. They may have destroyed much of the Thousand Suns, but a lot of them are still out there. A lot of them are still out there and causing trouble. They failed in that. They then go after Horus. They have to go out and try and kill Horus. And they fail in that. And the one time they succeed heroically on Terra. But it leads to the ironic death, quote-unquote, of the Emperor as he is. Because the Emperor doesn't believe in the Space Wolves anymore. How tragic is that? Right? How badass are the Space Wolves? You can create badass characters through hardship and pain. It's what people don't seem to understand. When you write these stupid, self-insert, edgelord characters, right? Mary Sue characters, they fly in the face of interesting stuff, of interesting storytelling. This is an interesting, in my opinion, an interesting take on the Space Wolves. I would collect this army. I totally would. They're awesome, right? At the end of the Heresy, Rus leads the vengeful warriors in the Scouring, and when it is done, he hurls himself into the Eye of Terror after the traitors, unable to be held back by his brothers or the remainder of his warriors, such as his guilt and shame for failing at the moment the Emperor needed him most. We never see him again until whenever he returns in the 40k setting, hopefully changed by the warp in some way. The Legion breaks into warband chapters that kind of act like loyalist chaos warbands, fighting fire with fire. They always range around the Eye of Terror, right? Becoming more and more warped, more and more kind of like traitorous, even though they're not traitors, because they're waiting for the Alpha to come back. They are wolves, howling, saying, we're waiting for Dad to come back, and we're here for him. Whenever he's here, he's going to lead us. Once again, he's going to come out of the Eye of Terror with heads of traitors nailed to his armor, and he's going to lead us against the 13th Black Crusade. That's how fucking badass the Space Wolves would be in my setting. What do you guys think? Would you change the Space Wolves in any way whatsoever? Or do you like them the way that they are? Do you think I've gone in too hard on some of the Space Wolf players? Or do you think, like me, that about 90% of them are really cool dudes, but like 10% of them really let the side down? I don't know. I'm a bit of an idiot, as per usual. Have a little look in the comments and go down below and tell me what you think. I love you all a long time. I'll be back tomorrow with some more Hobby Nightmares. If you like what I do, please go and give Composite Games some love. They are keeping supporting the channel, and we love them a very lot on this channel. See you later on. Love you a long time. Have a good one. See ya.